Hey Coyotes, Miss Holman here, and I'm going to teach you how to measure angles. So the first thing that you want to do when you see an angle is determine if it's acute, obtuse, straight, or a right angle. Looking at this, I can tell that it is an acute angle, and that means it's going to be between 1 degree and 89 degrees. I can't have an angle of 0 degrees because that is just a line, and I can't have anything greater than 89 because that means it's 90 degrees and therefore a right angle. So, looking at this, knowing that it's acute, and I know that when I measure this, it has to fall between 1 degree and 89 degrees to be reasonable, I want you to look at what we have going on with our protractor. We have two sets of numbers. We have a top set, and we have a bottom set. The reason why pre-assessing whether the angle is acute, obtuse, or other is because it helps you determine which numbers you're reading. So this angle opens up to the right, and when I say opens up, I mean that this big open alligator mouth looking thing is pointing to the right. So when I'm looking at the numbers, if it's an acute angle, I'm going to be looking at these numbers here on the bottom. It doesn't make sense to use these numbers here on the top because they're greater than 89, so therefore they can't be my number. So looking at where this angle falls, I know that if the angle is getting bigger, then it's going to open up this way. And I can tell that because the numbers are also increasing as I get bigger, from 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on. So, right here, when I'm looking at 70, you can even take a line and extend this to see just about where it falls. I can see by doing that it falls right in between 70 and 80. Now, I can count or zoom in and count the specific degrees, so 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, or I can recognize that 75 is the median or the middle number in between 70 and 80. So the measure of this angle is approximately 75 degrees. And that checks out with being a number that falls in between my range of 1 degree to 89 degrees. Let's do another one. Down here, I can see that this angle opens to the right, but that it is an obtuse angle. So, when I'm looking at this, I know that it's going to be 91 degrees all the way up to 179 degrees. Can't be 90 degrees because that's right. Anything less would be acute. It can't be 180 because 180 is a straight angle. So again, I have two sets of numbers that I can read. I've got, again, the top, and I've got the bottom numbers. Again, pre-assessing and knowing that it has to be a number between 91 degrees and 179 degrees, I can look at where this ray is pointing and recognize that it's either going to be 60 degrees or 120 degrees because it's pointing right at those numbers. So, thinking reasonably, 60 doesn't fall in between my range of 91 and 179. So therefore, it has to be 120 degrees. This is where a lot of kids mess up. This is a really simple process, but if you don't pre-assess or have the degrees for what an obtuse angle is, what an acute angle is, memorized, then you're really going to struggle with this activity. All right, let's move on. Looking at both of these, I can see that this angle was opening to the right. This angle now opens to the left. It doesn't change the process as long as I'm pre-assessing first. So looking at this angle, I know that it's obtuse. and I know that makes it between 91 degrees and 179 degrees. Now, again, this ray is lined up on 0. So now I'm just looking at where this one's pointing to give me the measure. It's pointing at 140 and 40. Knowing that my number has to fall somewhere in this range, I can assess that this angle is approximately 140 degrees. Done. Again, if I'm pre-assessing first, it makes this process really simple. Same thing here. It's lined up on 0, meaning I just have to measure where the second ray is going, and I've got my angle. So I can see this one's acute. That means 1 degree to 89 degrees. I have two separate numbers. It could either be 30 degrees or 150. 30 degrees is the only number that falls within that range. So that's my answer. Again, it doesn't matter if the ray opens to the left. Oh, that was a bad arrow. If it opens to the left or to the right, if I'm pre-assessing, looking at the numbers, and then determining which one actually fits, I can measure just the same. Okay, these are trickier. Why? Because one of the rays in the angle is not aligned on 0, meaning I can't just count where a number is and say that's the measure of the angle. I have to do a little bit of calculation. So I'm trying to determine the arc or the measurement of the angle. That's the space or how many degrees fall in between both rays. They also meet here at this point. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to look at the numbers that each one is pointing at. Now I can solve this two different ways. I have my top number and I have my bottom number. If I find the difference between the numbers, I'll find the space or the degrees that this measures. However, I can only use both of the top numbers or both of the bottom numbers. So for example, I can subtract 130 and 60, or I can subtract 120 and 50 because they fall in the same color groups. I can't do 60 minus 50. I can't do 130 minus 120. Think about if it was lined up on 0. 10 degrees would look like that. That's really small. So that's not reasonable if I'm checking my work. So I'm going to go and subtract both of these to show you that you get the same answer. Doesn't matter which process you use, I get the same answer, but that tells me that this measurement is 70 degrees. And again, I can assess the angle beforehand. Notice that this is an acute angle and say, well, does 70 fall between that range of 1 degree to 89 degrees? And yes, it does. Let's do the same thing with this one. This one is obtuse. So again, my reference point is that it's 91 degrees all the way up to 179. Looking at the points, I'm going to circle where these two go. Now, this one is not straightforward. As I look at it, it falls in between. Now, I can approach this one of two ways. I know that it's either 35, because it's in the middle of 30 and 40, or it's 145. So sometimes you have to do a little mathematician work beforehand. Again, I still have two sets of numbers. I either have 140 and 35 or 145 and 40. Make sure that you don't get them confused. If it helps you, you can cross off the bottom numbers and only do top, or you can do vice versa. Cross off the top numbers and subtract only the bottom, so you're not looking at two sets of numbers and not mixing them up. So I can do 145 minus 40, or I can do 140 minus 35. You might find that one is easier than the other, but they both give you the same answer. And again, this number falls within that range, so it checks out as an obtuse angle. This process might take you a little bit of practice, but once you do it, it's really fun, almost like a puzzle, and you are totally capable of doing it. Have fun during your independent, and I'll see you in the next lesson.